Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. I'm your host, Hannadi Jordan, Communications Associate at the Bipartisan Policy Center. In today's episode, we dive into the new Liberty campaign launched by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Joining us to unpack the details of Liberty, we have John Basilisi, Vice President of Immigration Policy at the Chamber, here to discuss the campaign's objectives and shed light on the potential implications. We'll also talk with regular contributor Teresa Cardinal Brown, a former Chamber Immigration Director, about the history of the business group's involvement in immigration issues. Then, as we start summer and our dreams of holiday travel and activities, Teresa will talk about seasonal immigrant workers and the visa system their employers rely on to ensure we can enjoy our vacation. Stay tuned. The U.S. immigration system is facing a number of complex challenges. On the one hand, the state of border security paints a picture of disarray. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reports over 1.2 million border encounters on the southwest border in the first 6 months of this fiscal year, over 160,000 more encounters than the same period last year. Migrants are arriving in Mexico daily, exceeding shelter capacity and even camping out near ports of entry. At the same time, the inadequacies of the U.S. legal immigration system are negatively impacting businesses, communities, and the economy. Companies of all sizes and across various industries are facing significant workforce shortages, and the immigration system simply isn't flexible enough to enable these companies to tap into the talent they need. As the Chamber of Commerce's Liberty campaign emphasizes, bipartisan congressional action is needed to address these concerns. Joining us to walk us through the campaign is John Basilisi, Vice President of Immigration Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hannadi, thank you for having me.
So, John, I'm going to step in here because, as Hannadi mentioned, I worked at the Chamber of Commerce ages ago in the early 2000s. I think you and I like to say that I was you 3 people ago.
It may be 4, but yeah.
But I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about, the history of the Chamber working on immigration issues. And you worked on the Hill before you started working for the Chamber. So tell us a little bit about how the Chamber was seen during your time on Capitol Hill and in congressional offices on immigration when you were there.
Well, Teresa, Hannadi, I want to thank you both again for having me here to speak to on this podcast. And when I got to the Hill, I arrived at the very beginning of 2011. So this was right after the Tea Party wave washed into D.C. And even then, I know people tend to think like, well, at that moment in time, you started to see a lot of members in Congress starting to, buck the traditional institutions that typically would exert influence on Capitol Hill. And to me, I did not see that, at least when I got there. And now things have changed quite a bit. Because when I was on Capitol Hill, particularly for at least Senate Republicans, and that's what I can talk about the most, at least at that moment in time, because that's where I was. There was an awful lot of members that were really interested in what was going on in tech. And there was a lot of interest about how do we fix high-skilled immigration, how do we, what do we need to do to increase the availability of H-1B visas? What can we do to help international students that graduate who afterwards, if they didn't get OPT, would have to go home, or if their OPT ran out, they wouldn't be able to stay in the United States. There was a lot of interest in those issues. And I think part of it had to deal with just the overall economic conditions at the time. Because tech and, the fracking boom, those were the things that were driving economic growth at the time. H-2A, ag issues, those were important, but those were things that were important to certain members. My old boss, Senator Rubio, it clearly was important to him because, that's one of the 3 pillars, or the traditional 3 pillars of the Florida economy. It's agriculture, construction, and tourism. Any one of those things are struggling, the state struggles. And, so it's important to Georgia, it's important to California, it's important. You see ag issues being important. But, at the time, H-2B issues, seasonal non-agricultural issues, they were not nearly as popular as they are today. And I think it bears repeating like how high unemployment was when I first started my career on Capitol Hill. It was still very high. We were just getting out of the housing bubble bursting in 2008. You hit the trough of it in 2009 with the stock market, I think, was in the 6,000s after being in the mid, I think 10, 15,000 in terms of where it was prior to that bubble bursting. Things have changed since then. And, if you had asked me when I first got to the chamber, what's the one issue you think you're never going to make any headway on? I would have told you unequivocally H-2Bs. I remember actually answering that very question saying, we're not going to get anything done on H-2Bs. And I think it was about maybe a year and a half into my job here when the H-2B program, because of ongoing litigation, the Obama administration at the time just shut it down. And at the time you had in H-2B circles, there was still quite a bit of consternation among industries. And at that time, it brought everybody together. And that's when you started seeing H-2B cap relief becoming an issue. We've had H-2B cap relief of some form or fashion since fiscal year 16. Knocking on wood over here, we get it this year as well because it's critically important. But, it's like H-2B and tech have switched positions in terms of their popularity, particularly among Republicans.
So, I want to compare that a little bit. So I got to the chamber in the early 2000s. I think I joined there in 2000 actually. And that was, George W. Bush was elected and he was all for comprehensive immigration reform. And even before I joined the chamber, I was working at another association, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So we worked with the chamber a lot on a lot of these issues. What was fascinating to me at that time is, you're right, I think, coming off of Y2K, tech was still growing, like there was still a lot of interest there. But what was more interesting to me was the bipartisan support the chamber often had. It was seen very much as a Republican kind of leaning organization and stronghold. But there were a lot of Democrats that also had a very strong pro-business bent that were interested in knowing what the chamber thought about things and what they wanted to do. And I remember when we would give out our Spirit of Enterprise awards to members on Capitol Hill each year, there were a lot of Democrats who were perfectly happy and proud to, display that Eagle trophy in their offices. So I think it was, immigration itself was a more bipartisan issue. I like to say we had bipartisan support for immigration and bipartisan opposition to immigration. There were members in both parties in both camps. But we were able to succeed in getting, some smaller things done. In the late 1990s, the H-1B cap was temporarily increased. And again, President Bush came into office trying to get comprehensive immigration reform done. Now, 9/11 sidetracked a lot of that, but to his credit, he came back to it in 2007 and 2008 with bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. And so, I lived through the first attempts at comprehensive immigration reform. I think you lived through on Capitol Hill the last attempts at comprehensive immigration reform. And we maybe both of us can claim to be failures because we didn't succeed no matter where we worked on that. But let me ask you this, because this leads to where we are about the Liberty campaign. How did that experience of 2013, the Gang of Eight bill, and you said you worked for Senator Rubio, so you were very involved in the negotiation of that bill that passed the Senate and then ended up not going anywhere in the House. How do you think that impacted both how folks on the Hill saw immigration and maybe how the chamber engaged in immigration?
There's a lot to unpack there, Teresa. Not the least of which is, going through that exercise in 2013, that's when I started getting gray in my head and in my beard. The way that I look at how 2013, all that went down, for Republicans, like comprehensive is just a dirty word these days. And the sad thing is it was a dirty word back then too. And when you looked at the political calculus, you had a Democrat in the White House. You had Democrats having control of the Senate. The Republicans had control of the House. There was only, just looking at when you only control, as a Republican, you only control 1/3 of the elected branches of the federal government. you have to realize, like, all right, if the Democrats are going to want to do something, they wanted to do comprehensive. This was that was the ticket to play. And I remember, now, granted, at that time, I was a junior staffer in the Rubio office. So I didn't have the type of insight as to like all the strategic thinking. They brought me in every now and then. But in terms of how they approached it, they said, look, either Senator Rubio is going to have some control over how this process goes forward, or he's going to be the outside looking in. And the choice was made, like, Marco wants to get engaged on this, and we're going to be part of the, this gang of 8 that move forward. As time went on, it definitely got difficult. There were all sorts of, what is always the most interesting thing to me is seeing the intra-party squabbles. And I was able to witness this not just among Republicans, but I also saw the fights that were going on between Senator Schumer, Senator Leahy, Senator Durbin, Senator Feinstein. The experience was really eye-opening just to see how legislation like that gets put together. But in terms of that experience, I mean, like, we see how it all unfolded. And clearly, as 2014 came, you had the election season coming, it was abundantly clear that you would not be able to get a broader bill like that through Congress anytime soon. It is interesting because I think when you look back, now granted, I wasn't around in 2000, I don't want to age myself, but I was still in high school. You see, like, even if you just go to congress.gov and you look at bills that were put together back then, you'd see bipartisanship on smaller bills. You'd see both Democrats and Republicans willing to address a niche immigration issue. And sometime, you had this with some of the nursing bills in the early and late 90s. You saw it with when they raised the H-1B cap, like you said earlier. You would see this appetite, like, we actually have a problem. Let's address it. Let's just address this unique problem. Not try to solve everything all at once, just solve this unique problem. And when I got up here, it was just a matter of, like, either you're going to be for solving everything at one time, and that's the only game in town, or you're going to be on the outs. And I'm starting to, I think at this moment in time, we're still getting there. But I feel like both, because it's been so long since you've had any real fundamental changes to the immigration system, save for the EB-5 reform package that the chamber was very engaged in last year, was able to get signed into law in the Omni. You haven't seen big changes. And you're starting to see that come back together where you have very influential Democrats, very influential Republicans saying, we have a problem here and we need to solve it. And, that doesn't mean that there isn't an appetite for trying to solve lots of problems all at once. We had Congresswoman Salazar and Congresswoman Escobar get together on the Dignity Act, which in the prior Congress was a partisan Republican exercise. And in this Congress, it's now a bipartisan proposal. They need to be applauded for what they're doing because, let's be frank, it's tough sledding when you're dealing with immigration, whether you're doing a small bill or a large bill. I would posit that doing a larger bill, you're gonna catch more flies because you have more reasons to upset an awful lot of people. But even if you're doing something small, it's a very emotional issue for a lot of folks. And once you try and do something, there's always going to be someone who's really upset. And you got to confront that as a member of Congress or their staff.
Thank you both for that discussion. I'm going to fast forward now to present day so we can jump to the Liberty Campaign. John, can you tell us a little bit more about how the Liberty Campaign started and what its objectives are?
Of course, Hanadi. At the end of last year, the Chamber and a lot of other business trade associations that we work with, and you can look at the Liberty Campaign sign-on letter. We had over 430 national, state, local-based business trade associations join us in our call for liberty, which is what we're calling it. So if you're active on Twitter, which you're definitely more active than I am because I have basically an inert Twitter account, it's hashtag calling for liberty. But at the time, we had a lot of prominent members of the chamber who are also prominent members of many other trade associations in town saying, we have to do something on immigration. And it was the first time, at least since I've been here, that you've had an awful lot of companies saying the border situation is a mess. We got to do something to help push that along, because if we're going to continue to do what we've done in prior years, we're going to expect the same result. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So the other thing that I think was very important in how we put this together was, well, in prior Congresses, the chamber has worked. We've worked with agricultural associations on the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. We've worked with various other industries on H-2B reforms that I mentioned earlier. We work with tech and a lot of manufacturing interests on high-skilled immigration. But we've never worked with a broad cross-section, not just of national organizations, but state and local organizations. Say, listen, we've got to localize these problems. We've got to put there has to be a local face to this. And it wasn't just a matter of getting calls from our board members. It's getting calls from the really prominent state and local chambers saying, we've got to do something on immigration because all of our members are calling for it. And that is what spurred the negotiations that we worked with the National Retail Federation, the American Farm Bureau Federation, the International Fresh Produce Association, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, U.S. Travel. And that's how we got to a position where, all right, we're putting this campaign together. We're going to have hundreds of signatories to this letter. And as we move forward, we had 6 key areas of interest. And, if you want to put them into 2 basic buckets, I call them the security bucket and the legal immigration bucket. But in terms of what we're asking for on security, we need to increase the resources that we have along the southern border and our ports of entry. And now that's human resources, that's physical resources, that's technological resources. And, Teresa, I know you can attest to this because, you actually worked at DHS for quite some time in your career. Each border sector is different. Like, what they need in Tucson is different than what they need in the Rio Grande Valley, and that's different from what they need in San Ysidro. And it's important that we get that right. And let's face it, the chamber members, we're not experts on what is needed in each sector, but we know that more is needed, particularly in high traffic areas. Like, we can't sit here and deal with the same type of fencing construct we have, the same amount of human resource that you have in each sector, and the technology needs to be updated substantially to make sure that we know who's coming. We know who's trying to cross, and do we have the ability to either turn them back or make sure that we can actually detain them when they cross the United States. The other thing, and this is something that's really new for the chamber, is in the sense that what we're calling for, and not just new for the chamber, new for many of the groups that signed on to this campaign with us, is how we reform our asylum system. Something has to be done because that's right now a very big driver of the crossings that we're seeing today, and they're elevated. There was a lot to be made about Title 42's ending. It's going to get really bad right away. We haven't seen that type of surge. I would say in the days leading up to Title 42's ending, we saw a surge. But after it officially was put to bed, the numbers fell off a little bit. But keeping the historic perspective here, you can go back to other times when you had a lot of crossings. I'm thinking the unaccompanied alien child crisis of 2014, 2019. You all saw really elevated numbers of crossings. But the levels that we have today, even though they've fallen off from the peak, they're still higher than that. And that means that's still a problem. We got to deal with that. And the last security bullet or the last security element that we had is instituting modern and effective employment verification systems and reforms. The I-9 process that we have, it was developed when I was 2. So this is a paper-based process that looking at the problems that we have today, clearly that's not, it is not an effective deterrent to unauthorized deployment in the United States. But looking at all those things, you could do all those things. You could come up with the perfect legislative proposals for all three of those things. You would not solve the problems that you have. They may make a difference at the margins, but it's not going to solve the problems because we have an immigration system that, depending upon what provisions you're looking at in the INA, it was either a product of the 65 Act, of IRCA in 86, or the Immigration Act in 1990. Regardless of what you're looking at, we're dealing with a system that is designed for a different moment in time, a much different America, if I may say so myself. We need to have an immigration system that meets the needs of our nation today in 2023. And that means we got to significantly increase the annual quotas for employment-based immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas. We've got to really rethink antiquated and, in my view, arbitrary eligibility requirements, seasonality being top among the list, because there's an awful lot of industries that can't make use of H-2A or H-2B. And that's where you see a lot of those companies. That's where you'd find the most struggles among industries in the United States in terms of trying to meet their workforce needs. And last but certainly not least, we need new programs. So I'm thinking of international students. We're thinking of entrepreneurs who would like to be able to get a visa, but because they're not an employer yet, they want to become one. They can't get a visa. And a lot of other high demand workers, I'm thinking construction, agriculture, meat processing, mining, among many others that are out there that need access to workers. And those are the big, those are the things that we're calling for in the Liberty campaign.
Thank you, John. Interestingly, the campaign is calling for both border and legal immigration reform. And I'm curious, is there a particular reason why the chamber decided to sort of combine both pushes within the same campaign?
Yes, there was a significant call among chamber members for us to start getting more active on these border issues for several reasons. One, they are these are national problems in scope. And it requires more attention. Like, the business community is starting to suffer from this, whether it's, you think of your retailers or your restaurants that are in border regions that have to deal with problems that they've never had to deal with because of this influx of people that are coming into their communities. Oftentimes it's temporary, but there's still problems that they're dealing with. Whether it's, so many people just coming in, just using their bathroom facilities and then just leaving, or, walking all over their property and destroying the landscaping and the lawn they have in front of their establishments. And last, certainly not least, you think of the healthcare issues that the hospitals in these areas are dealing with, because it's not like folks that are coming across the border today, they don't have a primary care physician in the U.S. that they can call on. So if there's a problem where they broke their ankle on their way here, they go to a hospital here, they have to be seen. And those are resources that the hospital otherwise would have for other patients there, now being diverted to these individuals. And, I can tell you, we've been working with a lot of the border states, and they've been telling us unequivocally, this is a huge problem. So that's one reason why we did it. The other reason is, if we're going to get the types of meaningful reforms that we're seeking, the border issues have to be addressed in some form or fashion. Does that mean every issue has to be addressed at one time? No. But if you're going to get something larger than H-2B cap relief that's only available for a fiscal year, you're going to have to be addressing these issues in some form or fashion.
It's been, I think, exactly a month since the chamber sent a letter to members of Congress introducing the Liberty campaign. So since then, what has the response been like from members of Congress to the campaign so far?
And it's a great question. And the response that we've gotten, it's been, at least among members and their staff, has been overwhelmingly positive. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, because there's still an awful lot of members that we haven't met with to discuss what our goals are with Liberty. And look, we know there's going to be some challenges that are out there. But in terms of the individuals who, you could probably name them yourselves, but the folks that have been most engaged on these issues, I'd say over the last 3 or 4 Congresses, they're all saying this is a good development. This is good to have because the business community should be talking about border issues. The business community should be talking about expanding legal immigration. These are the fact that you have so many associations now all singing from the same song sheet. That's also helpful because in years past you'd have this association focused on one niche issue, another association focused on another niche issue. This is the business community trying to, not trying, we're telling them like, it's time for you to emphasize this, because what oftentimes gets lost is like, what exactly is the cost of inaction? And I think it's obvious. Like, look at what we're dealing with today. Had we done something 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, like if you actually had some changes that would have helped companies meet their workforce needs, have a more orderly system for people to migrate, not just to, come to the US, but also remain in the US, you would have a situation in America where I think you're always going to have some situation where there's going to be individuals that are going to try to come in to the US illegally. But the magnitude at which this is happening today, it couldn't be this big if you had some sort of reform in place that had the ability for companies across a whole host of industries that can't make use of the current system today, if they had something that would allow them to meet their workforce needs. And the same thing would go for having more border security.
This leads me to my next question, which is at the top of the segment, you mentioned the Dignity Act, which was introduced recently by Representatives Salazar and Escobar. And it's a bipartisan immigration reform effort, and you commended it. But is there anything the chamber would have liked to see different in the act? Are there any areas where you see it falling short?
Well, I'll say this. That's probably this is the biggest bill that we're probably going to see that proposes to reform our immigration system in this Congress. And I think this kind of alludes to the comments that I made earlier about how, high-skilled issues have become much more contentious than they have, particularly on H-1B issues. And it would have been nice to see more H-1B reforms in that proposal. But if you look at what they did propose to do, basically cutting off the backlog at 10 years. So if you've been waiting in an employment-based or family-based visa backlog for 10 years, that's it. You're not going to wait anymore. You've waited 10 years, you're current, you can get a visa. They've raised the per country caps up from the current 7% level that they are. They propose to raise them to 15. For anybody that has a PhD in a science, technology, engineering, or math field, those individuals can now qualify for an O visa, which, among parlance, anybody who works with immigration attorneys, this is the Oprah visa. So you got to be really, really special to get an O. But that's good, because these are individuals who have a lot of promise in the types of fields where we're really going to need their talent here in the U.S. to help the economy grow. They're not going to count derivatives anymore in the employment-based cap. They're specifically calling for H-4 work authorization. They're making the F visa a dual intent visa. All of those things are great for a whole host of industries, because you're providing the type of access to visas that companies really need right now. So, I mean, you're really hard pressed to find like, oh, there's a problem with this bill. But if you really want me to nitpick, that would be my nitpick right there.
So overall, it's a good bipartisan effort with good provisions. But how optimistic are you that something like this, or the type of immigration reforms that the chamber is pushing for, could get passed this year?
Anadi, I think it's important to understand like how Congress works a little bit in terms of how legislation gets passed. Because oftentimes you'll have a bill that gets proposed, and the bill sponsors know that they're going to have hurdles they need to overcome. And that may mean you need to pare back your bill in some form or fashion, or you reintroduce either it or you reintroduce parts of it. we are still very early on in this Congress. I mean, I know it's June. We've gone through 5+ months. We're now at the 6th month this year, but it's still very early. And I think there's still a lot of opportunity to get things done. And I feel like it's really important to keep in mind other types of developments that could occur that help put immigration reform issues on the front burner. We talked about how there was a little bit of I want to say a sigh of relief, but there were expectations about Title 42's ending that didn't pan out right away. We're not out of the woods at all. I would say we're not out of the woods yet. I do think there is a potential for some sort of border crisis that could push these issues to the front burner. There is also ongoing litigation with respect to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, otherwise known as DACA. If the DACA program is, effectively ended by the U.S. Supreme Court at some point, that could be another exogenous shock to the system that says, all right, Congress, we have to do something for the 580,000 plus individuals who are currently benefiting from that program. That to me is, you got to keep that in mind, in the sense that there's still an opportunity for things to happen. Now, whether or not it's going to be something that looks like the Dignity Act, or it's something that deals with a few niche issues, whether it's ag labor issues, or it's H-2B issues, or it's international student issues, the types of things that I'm laying those out because those are issues that I see as ones, when I'm talking to folks on Capitol Hill, these probably get the most attention, the most sympathy from people in both parties. This affects me, this affects them. Or it could be something that's, unique to an industry. I remember during COVID, you had the Health Workforce Resilience Act. I could very well see something happening in the future where there's a massive shortage of doctors, nurses, PAs, nurse assistants, you name it, where maybe you have a group of bipartisan members in either House of Congress saying, listen, there's a healthcare workforce shortage, we want to address it in some form or fashion. All those things are possible. And, the unemployment rate is incredibly low. And I look at this and I say to myself, where was this unemployment rate in 2013? Because it certainly would have helped quite a bit to, not just on S744, but just on immigration reform issues writ large, because it would have changed a lot of people's minds. Because I believe when we started, I think that January 2013 or it was December 2012, unemployment was still 8%. And I think by the time we passed the bill, it may have been in the mid-7s, but that's still really high. More than double what it is today.
Lastly,
I'll leave it at that.
Lastly, John, before we let you go, what are the Chamber's plans going forward to help advance congressional immigration reform now that you've launched this campaign?
Anadi, we have a lot of things that are on our to-do list here at the Chamber. We are going to do quite a bit of lobbying on Capitol Hill, meeting with members. I think there's a lot of educating that needs to be done. If you look at the Constitution of both the House and the Senate, so many members have not voted on an immigration bill ever in their career because they've only been here for one or two cycles. They never voted on something big like an S744 or something that was the Queen of the Hill effort in 2018 and things like that. We're also be working quite a bit with the state and local chambers, retail federations, hotel and lodging associations, to help show that this is an issue that affects people back home in their district. It's one thing for us to go to Capitol Hill and say, listen, there's a lot of problems, you need to really take a look at them. And immigration reform is one of those things that could help solve your constituents' problems. It's not going to be a panacea for everything, but it's definitely something that could help. And trying to put a local face on it, I go back to the efforts that the Chamber has been successful on H-2Bs. And we were able to really put a local face on this thanks to all the grassroots engagement that we have with the folks that we're a part of in our H-2B Workforce Coalition. That's the very big group of H-2B stakeholders. And that's how you get Andy Harris and Congressman Keating, who rarely agree on much, But when it comes to H-2Bs, they're of like mind. The same thing could be said for Congressman Bergman up in Michigan and Shelley Pingree, who's in coastal Maine. There's a lot that can be done to help show members of Congress, look, we've got to act, and you've got to act sooner rather than later. And that's why the Liberty Campaign is legal immigration and border enforcement reform this year, because we've seen what happens when there's a lot of inertia when it comes to just inaction. A lot of people they're very negative on prospects. Like, listen, it can be done, and it has to be done, because if nothing gets done, that to me is the only unacceptable outcome of all of this, because we know what happens when Congress fails to act. And if the laws stay the same, you see the problems that we're dealing with today, they're not going to go away on their own.
Thank you, John, for joining us today and shedding light on this new campaign. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about seasonal immigrant workers, their visa processes, and challenges in the existing system and helping seasonal employers meet their workforce needs. Don't go anywhere. So we're back with Teresa to talk seasonal workers. Teresa, for many, Memorial Day in the United States represents the kickoff for summer, and we think of summer activities like going to the pool or the beach, amusement parks, summer camps or resorts, and other activities. But more and more when we do these things, we're likely to encounter foreigners working in these locations. So can you explain what a seasonal worker is and what type of visa these seasonal workers might be applying for?
Sure. So you heard John talk a lot about H-2Bs and H-1Bs and all of these letter number combinations. And I think on the podcast, we've talked about it before, but the letter number combinations are the designations for different temporary visas. And the letter number combinations come from the section of the immigration law that describes those temporary visa categories. So the H-2B category is for seasonal or temporary non-agricultural work, mainly work that doesn't require a degree, which those jobs would normally be H-1B jobs. So a couple of big things about the H-2B. One is that the job itself has to be temporary. So you can't use an H-2B visa for any job that is year-round. So we often talk about it as seasonal, but it could also be a one-time need, like a company that's temporarily expanding into a new business line and is not going to continue it, but is doing something like a big job that they need to get done. They need to hire extra help to get that big job done. And then that extra help would leave. Or something called a peak load, where, there's seasonality to a year-round company, where sometimes of the year they know they have work. So think about extra workers that are hired in retail around the end of the year holiday season, right? Those are peak load. But the bottom line is that it's a job that's not going to continue. So an employer, in order to get an H-2B visa, does have to first show that they have tried to recruit in the United States and can't find U.S. workers. And then once they have done so, then they can apply to the government to hire a foreign worker. There are a few other job temporary visas that are also sometimes used for these kind of more seasonal work. So the J-1 visa is a State Department run visa. It's actually an exchange visitor program, and it's run by the State Department's Office of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And the purpose of the J-1 program is to give foreign nationals